Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Maps and Metaphors. This is your host, Pranav, and today we have Harshita with us. She is a permaculture designer and a founder at Kintsugi, which focuses on regenerating ecosystems. She provides consultancy, design, and implementation of any kind of small and big scale permaculture projects. She was working as a fashion and textile designer soon to realize that she has to address a bigger purpose in her life. And that's why she left the fashion industry and moved to the south of India to Auroville. There she was introduced to reforestation and permaculture, and her life changed after that. We'll be talking about her journey and the work she is doing at Kintsugi. Also, in today's episode, we are going to talk about various challenges we are facing in the current times related to the ecosystems and nature around us, be it related to food or sustainable living or awareness in terms of our consumption pattern, which is really important to address in today's time. And that's where we will be deep diving into permaculture, which is the main theme of today's episode. And we will be covering various aspects about it. So let's get started. Bringing a lot of awareness and interesting details onto the table, especially what your journey has been with permaculture. And I think your background is very different from permaculture. I think you studied fashion and then you moved here. But why I connected with you, especially, was I saw you're doing amazing stuff with permaculture, and especially it's happening in Goa. Goa is just an excuse, I must say, but it has something with every youngsters. I mean, I'm not a youngster; I cannot call myself a youngster anymore. But there are memories definitely from early 2011 or 12, like where we used to have groups and we would like find excuses to travel to Goa and enjoy the beaches and the beauty it has so much to offer. And I don't think so anyone who actually doesn't like Goa. There's always something there to do. A beautiful nature, beaches, amazing food, people, whatnot. But for my side, like I have been interested in the topic of the sustainability, permaculture, regenerative farming, uh, self-sustainability. Climate change. Everything is kind of quite connected, but specifically about the subject of self-sustainability. It made me very curious. Like 2 years ago, and that's where I started attending some of the meetups and connecting with people who come from that background or maybe who are doing amazing stuff like you do. So I was trying to attend those events and go into the food forest and things like that with a lot of people who are actually directly involved, and was always trying to find out questions. Why are we uh, so far with the methods and the consumption patterns we see in our daily lives in the modern times. How did we come this far and did not realize what things were there already, which were very natural, naturally taught to us, or was just embedded in the whole system. you know the way agriculture was introduced, and then we moved into the industrial age. But that's still like huge terms I'm using, but there is some kind of connection where I think the faster food production, and at the same time one has to take care of uh, the famine, not really overtake the population. So there should be something always on the table. People should not die of hunger, and I think that's where like there were new methods and all fertilizer, GMO stuff, along with a lot of bureaucracy, I think, was introduced into the societies in the kind of agriculture that we are very much used to, the monoculture. Um, so I was always like, finding out like how did we come this far, and what could be done to undo this, in the most basic way. As an individual, I'm not a farmer as a background, and not really coming from any connections also. I cannot find any connections who has any relationship to agriculture directly. Definitely a lot of people who are interested in it, but I have never, unluckily, been a part or connected to someone. But it's a very good time where we have like technology, where we can easily connect with people and collaborate and understand stuff. That's what I'm trying to do with you, Harshita, and thanks for being on this episode. I'm just going to wrap it up because I think, taking a lot of time. So yeah, I mean, like I've tried to be in those kind of events where I try to find answers, and it seems like there are certain challenges when someone tries to say, okay, why are you so much dependent on fertilizers? Okay. There are slugs. For example, if I'm talking about the European geography, people talk about slugs or little animals, insects, and so that's like a very singular way of looking at things, a very boxed way of looking at things. You want to get rid of something, so, because of which you are trying to do something which will actually have a domino effect on something else, and we are kind of just building it up so much that we are kind of in a one big trap, if we are doing the kind of food agriculture, or how do you say, like the monoculture practice that we have. And also I learned that there are a lot of so this is what I learned was this. Basically, I'll put it as a gist. So this was more, everything lives in sort of an ecosystem. There are also animals, even tiniest of the creatures who live under the soil, which play an important role for having the crops in the most natural way. So this is all, everything is connected, and if even if we try to take one element out of it, everything collapses, or probably will collapse. And we are seeing like a lot of uh, examples around the world, where which triggers a lot of discussions that what should be the actions. And that's where, like, wonderful designs like permaculture and many other ways, which maybe I'm not aware of, kind of brings out a lot of interesting details and answers to a lot of bigger questions. So I think I'll stop now. And thanks for being on this episode, Harshita. Welcome. So let's get started. Maybe we'd like to know a little bit about you, a bit about your background. So I'll give the mic to you.
Okay, thank you, Pranav. Really happy to be here, and I apologize that we also couldn't connect anytime earlier, but life has been very busy. So, yes, I'm Harshita. I am a permaculture designer. That's not the, as you rightly said, that I studied fashion and textiles and worked in the fashion industry, only to realize that this is not something which serves the bigger purpose. Made me question life, and I left. And then somehow it happened that I learned about reforestation, and it fascinated me so much. The connection to earth was just so fascinating and so deep that it just, I kept on going, and then it has brought me to where I am today. And yeah, permaculture is a great term. I think personally for me, it has been a great tool to design my life very efficiently. So I could literally design every single moment of my life with a lot of consciousness because of permaculture. So for me, it has really been a life changing tool. And yes, there are a lot of different practices, permaculture being one of them, which can enable and help people to live life a bit more sustainably. Of course, when we talk about the masses that we live in, it's not easy to go back, like you were talking about monocultures, it's absolute, or the way farmers have been using fertilizers, or the slug problem. So there is a slug problem because there are no predators left, or very few predators left for there are pests, enough, more than enough pests, because there aren't enough predators anymore, right? And the more we dive in monocultures, we also realize, or GMO seeds, everything, or the fertilizers we are using, everything is so unsustainable on its own. And it's like, it's not completing the cycle, it's a line, it's very linear, so you have to keep on drawing those lines instead of forming the circle. But again, to like you gave the example of Europe and agriculture there, I right now live in India, and the agriculture here, and I'm often having these conversations with different organizations, corporations, and local farmers. We cannot expect them to do polyculture at this point, or do organic farming at this point, because they won't have yield, right? Because the land is so not degraded necessarily, but it has been infested with so much of outside resources, which were not necessary in the beginning. To, like, nature doesn't charge us any money to give us clean air, to give us soil, and to give us food. But since capitalism plays the role that it does in the world, and that is what has led to the GMO seeds being what they are today. And I mean, it's rather sad that almost 80 to 90% of the seeds have been used in India, at least, are GMO seeds. And there's no backing out now for them, because, I mean, also pharmaceuticide have been a uh, major issue in last 10 years or so, especially cotton farmers, because they came so much in debt thanks to GMO. And so it's not really sustainable. But how are they, who don't even make a lot of money, going to go back to polyculture, or going to go back to natural farming without receiving the support from anybody from outside? Because they will be in huge losses. I mean, Sri Lanka tried doing something where they went all
Yeah.
organic, and it ended up in a chaos. So I think this is a fine line which we need to address with a lot of stakeholders, um, so that we make sure that the farmers are. I mean, I've drifted off from permaculture to farmers right now, but I'll come back to permaculture.
I, th- I think it's all connected, and it's very important to talk both.
So it is actually the biggest stakeholders which need to be put in spot of, how will a farmer even try to go back to growing food more naturally, or following the food forest layers, or just having a polyculture growing system, or even crop rotation is not something as a practice which is done very often anymore. And like 20 years, 30 years, 40 years back, at least that was happening. So yeah, it is complicated, it's very fragile, where the farmer cannot be blamed, because again, the population of the world is such right now, and farming practices definitely have not been focused in the ways they should have been. And I think big corporations have a great, heinous, disastrous role to play in that. And now, yeah, we are stuck. I do talk about this with multiple people I am in talks with, if we could design a project where some corporation can adopt this many number of farmers for next 10 years, and make sure they get their annual income and they go organic. Because, I mean, we never know how long it takes for the land to completely heal, because again, these are all estimations, right? But it
Yeah.
says that 10 years is the time where the land needs to breathe, and then eventually it will start producing organic food. If you have a land where you've been using chemical fertilizers, then your produce won't be organic for many years, because you will still have the residues of that fertilizer in the soil. So yeah, like if they could adopt, some farmers, I don't really know how successful of a model it is, but it's something I would love to try someday, where at least they're well taken care of, and then they could put all the effort back into bringing back the natural land and the natural way the land should be, bring back the pests and the predators, bring back the life, bring back the biome. The It will take time, and if we could do something like that, great. But otherwise, how a farmer who barely earns any money, his first
Yeah.
concern is not if he should have a land which is full of life. His main concern is to make enough money so that he and his family can pass by for next year or so. So I think we also, again this point of being privileged and not so privileged, right? Where we constantly, I mean, also how crazy it is that we live in a world where if I want to eat healthy and organic, I have to pay decent amount of money for that, which means I need to belong to a higher society in order to afford organic. How bizarre it is when nature doesn't charge us any money. Like, I think we as a system are messed up. And we really need to, yeah, like question these things on our everyday basis. Like, I think it's criminal of us to think that we can afford to eat organic, but somebody who lives on the roadside doesn't have that same
Yeah.
luxury of eating organic and healthy food. America is a great example for that. Food, or healthy food, is expensive. What will people eat? I mean, they're not left with them with much of an option. If you
Exactly.
want to eat healthy, then you got to be rich, and that's just very bizarre. Because if we really go to remote villages, where you still have some of the tribes intact, where you still have some of the ways of old living intact, you see the kind of food they eat has to do with the geography there, has to do with the culture there, and it's good food. They are still living, and we were talking about self-sustainability. I think it is in the remotest of the villages or with the tribes is when we actually see self-sustainability, and good that they are that way. And I really hope they don't come in contact much with the civilized people like us, because we ruin them.
Yeah.
And then we show, it's always also, again, we have a very privileged lens of looking at things. So what is maybe a crisis for me might not be the crisis for them. They might be happy in that, but because I think, oh, this is not okay for them, I will introduce alien concepts to them, which in the beginning will be hard for them to grasp, but eventually they will get used to it, and that is how I will eliminate their rawness and their truthfulness. Like you mentioned about Goa, right? That how green and how beautiful it is, but also the sad reality of Goa is that a lot of expats are moving to Goa, buying their lands. People are getting more greedy because they are getting to sell the lands. A lot of jobs are gone because Goa had the culture of fishing, toddy tapping. I used to live in South Goa, and there's only one toddy tapper left in that particular area, and that's scary. Like nobody wants to take it up. So what are people in Goa doing? They move to the bigger city, which is Panjim, then to look for some sort of job so that they have a monthly salary, so to say. So like sustainability on its own and permaculture, it's all interconnected, but it is such a big topic, and especially in today's socio-political climate, we really need to address these things. Otherwise, and not addressed by you and I talking, but we really need to bring in stakeholders who could take responsibility, because to do something on a smaller scale is possible, But to then again, when we bring in the masses, of course, we wouldn't say that, all right, let all the farmers be organic completely and let the
Mm.
half of the world population die because we won't have food for them. But just to understand how it's all working, it's so interconnected. I mean, it is, again, it's the big corporations controlling every single thing happening around
Yeah.
the planet, and that's very scary.
Yeah, and I think that's one area where a lot of things are actually going wrong. But before, what the points that you were mentioning are very relevant, and it's very sad and definitely needs to be addressed. Uh, and also, when we talk about something, I was reading and also trying to find out how other farmers are doing in different parts of the world. Somewhere I remember, maybe it was in Sweden, I think. They actually give it a try because we have to leave the land without fertilizers, when someone has to practice organic farming. But yeah, um, we'll get to permaculture, but this is something I would like to mention only if it's specific to organic farming. Organic farming would be, I think, just without any fertilizers to start with. So what they were doing is they were dedicating like 10% of the land where they don't do anything with chemical fertilizers for 5 years, and then they make it ready for the organic farming, and that's where they grow little by little, seeing on how the demand is or how their land is doing. But I think that's still like very small, but maybe a little bit on a positive side, to if you look at it, uh, at least the efforts are there. I was happy to know that. But certainly the big question to ask is that how one can start small, and the second thing is there should be more awareness among the people, not for the small like short-term benefits. I think one, or we as a collectively as a society, should look at a bigger picture, that what impacts does the non-organic way of doing farming is impacting, the health and the soil, the whole ecosystem. And at the same time, the authorities which can bring more control or infuse more control, organizations, governments, they should also uh, plan a really good path, or sort of a proper plan which helps in achieving the goals. Easy to say thing, but difficult to implement. And that's where like we would go to the next part of our conversation, where we would like to hear more how you are trying to bring the change, in Kintsugi. I hope I'm saying it right.
Yeah, yeah, it is.
Would like to hear more about it.
Okay. Well, so also just to say, permaculture is a tool which changed my life, but also it's not the only tool I, uh, blindly follow. I really believe when we find better things, or when we find the Dalai Lama says it, right, you can have your principles and beliefs, and when you find something better, you change it for that better. So permaculture has been, it of course started with growing food, but now in my life at least, or with Kintsugi, it has expanded a lot more to restoring local ecosystems, because that is what I really believe is the need of the hour. um, Permaculture, by definition, for people who are unaware of, is a design science which is based on systems thinking and circular economy. So basically, permaculture started as permanent agriculture, but then they realized, at Bill Mollison and David Holmgren, they realized soon after they discovered permaculture, that how crazy the movement is and how big. And it also started as an anarchist movement, actually, which is quite interesting to look at. But then they
Yeah.
realized that permaculture could be applied to any aspect of your life, be it with respect to the farmer, or somebody who's living in a small house in the city, permaculture can be expanded that ways. So I think the more awareness, but again, not the awareness, I think it's about having more consciousness of consumption, which needs to be addressed in order for people to understand any of the concepts a bit more. Because, and in permaculture, we talk about that, right? That the problem is the
Yeah.
solution. So it's whether we are consuming out of need or whether it's a greed based consumption is something only humans can decide, of any sort. And if it is greed based, then you can reevaluate. And I think if all of us did that little check with ourselves, world would anyways be a better place to be. But
Yeah.
yeah, permaculture started as an agriculture movement. So you have a lot of practices which are related to agriculture, but it's not restricted to agriculture. And that is something which is so great about it. And also, I mean, since I have this platform to now speak, I also want to say, like, I've seen a lot of times, there's a lot of conflict between one school of practice versus the other. And I don't really think that's the way to go forward, because I think it's all approaches might be different. End result or end vision for all the practices is very similar, if we cannot quote unquote say it's the same, right? So instead of looking at, okay, permaculture is better than biodynamic or syntropic, it doesn't really work, because they all work in sync together, just like in nature, right? So yeah,
Yeah.
it's a great system of understanding, implementing, applying systems thinking, which is great, because all you're wanting to see is, okay, how do I close the circular loop and just make it functioning again and again and again. And yeah, it's great, because the principles of permaculture is the ethics, which are earth care, people care, fair share. I say earth care, all beings care, and fair share, because I think people are very selfish. So we need to really address all the beings. And it's also an open source. So permaculture is not owned by anybody, so there are these ethics and these principles, but then you are also free to add your own ethics and principles to permaculture. So maybe the 12 defining principles, maybe you find a 13th one or a 15th one, and slowly each person can really, based on where you are, you could have your own set of principles, and what is relevant to one place is never relevant to the other place, right? So that's why also I really like the approach permaculture has, because you can really understand, and you can never have a blueprint to follow. You have to study, you have to understand the geography, you have to understand the ecology, you have to understand the socio-economic um, value and impact, which is, or the current existence. You have to understand the politics. It includes, it's inclusive of it all, and we cannot, it's a very holistic practice. So if we just apply permaculture even in the broader sense, not necessarily again specific to farming, of course to farming, but also if we apply it in a broader sense to really look around 360 degrees before deciding or deciphering something, I think it can be a great tool for mankind. It is a great tool for mankind. People have been using it, because it again comes from, how did Bill and David understand or like found permaculture, is because they were studying indigenous cultures. So it's all there. I mean, if you've
Yeah.
traveled in Kerala, you would go to smaller villages and you would see people farming in the ways, I never saw up north, especially in Punjab, which is, okay, the hub for all things GMO.
Yeah.
So you will see a lot of like, it's just beautiful, and they don't understand permaculture. My grandfather, per se, and nobody spoke of waste segregation. He had different bins in his house. One was for dry leaves, one was green leaves, one was plastic, the other was food waste and paper waste, and he was segregating them. Then he used to make like compost out of the things he had. And this is not some, some rocket science knowledge which you only learn going to school. This is our ancestors' wisdom, right? So we really also need to address that wisdom of elderly is so important, and we sadly don't live in the world where we have a lot of that wisdom left. So we might as well really learn from people who are still remaining, because I mean, leaving it on our generations, which is already also the amount of woke people is a minority already. So I think it's there. Permaculture is very intuitive. At least for me, it has been very intuitive. So it's the more you connect with Earth, the more you have the answers to problems. Then the more the slugs won't be the problem. The more, also understanding that, okay, if it's an ecosystem, everything eats up everything. That's the cycle. I mean, we understand the food cycle very well now, because I mean, all of us have been taught that in school. uh, but
Yeah.
but then the soil cycle is the same, even more complex to say. And we need to understand that if you won't maintain that soil cycle, then you will not never have a balanced equation with respect to growing healthy food. Also, when we grow something in monoculture, which we are doing right now, we expose the plants to so many more pests, because there is no other plant or companion plant to protect the plant. I mean, it is saying that, okay, in this one village we will put all the small boys who are very fragile, and then they just have to deal with it. But okay, great, maybe they can, but also they cannot sometimes. So how about we provide to the plants and to human beings within the community of different sets of plants, and different sets of animals, and different sets of pests, different sets of predators. If all of it is together, it's balanced. I mean, why do we not see a lot of times in the forest ecosystem, we would not see a pest invasion until it happens if the pest is again introduced from us humans, if we have done something wrong. And but in natural forests you wouldn't see, even if there's an invasion, there are predators. So it always gets balanced out, and we really lack that balance, I think, from our everyday lives also, and especially when it comes to the food we eat. And we are so used to eating the kind of food. Masanobu Fukuoka, who is the father of natural farming, said something very like in his book One Straw Revolution, which I highly recommend to anybody to read. Not to, again, to not make a blueprint out of it, that this is what worked for him, so it's going to work for you. It won't. The geography, the topography, the landscapes are completely different. But he said something that the orange is now being injected because the customer wants it 1 month before than everybody else, before the actual season. So that is the complication, the level of complication we are dealing with. That if we would also, as consumers, know our rights and also know what's going in our bodies. The farmers are going to do what you want. They want to make money end of the day to survive and sustain their families. So yeah, but again, these are just the, so to say, we can talk about it, we can debate about these things, but to actually bring in the change is not so easy, because there's also a lot of resistance, right? Because why would they? And they are not the ones to be blamed. I think we who sit in the position of living a bit better lives, and the bigger corporations who are actively destroying the planet, we are the people who are responsible. And yeah, I mean, and if we choose to put bad things in our body, then the repercussions also are very visible. We are just like being delusional not to understand it all.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with every point that you say. And I think as a consumer, we are equally responsible for this mess because we demand for it, right? And that's why, like all the be it organizations or the big bodies which are like sourcing it, are able to do it even more and more because it's our greed. Not the greed, actually. Like we have got used to it, and a lot of us don't even have the consciousness or thinking that, for example, like something around the seasonal vegetables or seasonal fruits, I don't know, a lot of people these days, maybe in a lot of Western countries who still rely heavily on the supermarkets, don't even know where their food is coming from, So if you see the oranges, just like you were mentioning, they want it like a month before. So basically, you wanted to say before the season, or like, for example, mangoes in the winters. It's all there available. Sounds very odd because I feel a little bit lucky that I've seen a lot of India and have seen the farmer markets and have experienced the seasonal fruits. So I could, with my personal experience, say that this is odd, you know.
Mm.
But a lot of people, unfortunately, cannot really find the problem there. Yeah, so really, and you explained it very well with a lot of examples, and definitely a lot of listeners, I think, and a lot of people in general think that permaculture is very much related to only land or agriculture, but I think it's a little bit bigger concept or the design, which may be associated to, for example, rainwater harvesting,
Yeah.
and that could be starting from our own house, let's say, and several other examples. So, just wanted to add a bit more.
Yes.
Just, but absolutely everything makes sense, and the story about your grandfather, where he was putting bins, I'm really amazed because. I'm sure like his examples would be carried forward. Like it must have influenced you to some extent. What you're doing right now, I would just make a guess. You will have to tell me more. But you are one person who is connected with him, but there might be many more connections that he has, would have noticed it and also would have taken some lessons. So it's also the way we do, we bring some inspiration for others and also a bit of awareness and also consciousness of doing things right, which were probably uh, very much meant to be, what we are trying to achieve, let's say, through permaculture. Because I think nature was always like that, raw and composed of several combinations. So, for example, if you go into the forest, they don't have land with the boundaries. This will only have mangoes, or let's say uh, uh, figs, or some other crop, but they are all growing together because that combination is the magical combination which is helping it to survive, and we see it from one side. It might seem very simple, but there are animals, all the wildlife connected to it, all the magic that's happening beneath the soil, in the air, and river streams, normal water streams, things like that. So it's always amazing to look back into the nature. Um, I like to do it also myself, going back into the nature, hiking and discovering different places. And once somebody tries to draw a connection between what we are doing and what's already in the nature, a lot of answers already, a lot of questions are already answered, and there is one thing which I would like to mention. It's a little bit funny. uh, this garden weed is sort of a thing in Europe, and I think in India as well. When people are really bothered about it.
Mm.
I myself, I have a front garden where like a lot of weed grows, garden weed, and there is a general term for the weed. It So if I go by the literal definition, weed is some kind of a plant which is growing at a place where it should not be growing. So that's a weed, and it looks definitely odd. Maybe you have a beautifully landscaped summer garden, and then suddenly some messy green grass is growing, which looks a bit of odd from rest of the setting, and people get annoyed by that. But I think that's one very basic thing. to think like nature is actually trying to find to restore itself in
Mm,
its own ways.
mm.
And I think that is first step of realizing the 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 importance or like the existence of permaculture, the whole ecosystem. Would you like to add something to this?
Yes, I can always talk about weeds.
So this was the end of part 1 for this episode. I hope you guys enjoyed it so far. I request you to please click on the link on the side to check out the part 2. Also, if you like our content, please consider subscribing to our channel. It gives us a lot of motivation. And if you have any suggestions, please write to us in the comment box or to our email mapsandmetaphors@gmail.com.